Good morning, everybody. For those who are watching on live streaming, I'm sorry we're a few minutes late starting. We've had some technical difficulties at this end, but we can get underway now. We have a rotating chairman here, and so it's my turn to take the chair at this meeting of the Public Service Board Select Committee. My name is Councillor Martin Grocott, and I represent the Lansdowne ward in Abergavenny.
My name is Hazel Eilert and I'm the lead officer for scrutiny.
Paula Harris, Democratic Services. Hazel Clatworthy, Sustainability Policy Officer.
Matthew Gatehouse, Head of Policy and Governance.
Sharon Knight, manage the PSB in the Strategic Partnership Team for Monmouthshire Council.
Councillor Jane Pratt, I'm the Councillor for Llanelli Hill, and I'm also Chairman of the Select for Stronger Communities.
Jamie Trehan, Councillor for Overmonnow.
Councillor Simon Howarth, Chair of Adult Select and also Ward Member for Llanelli Community.
Okay, if we start off with apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. We received apologies this morning from County Councillors Petruni, Feakins, Howard, Pavia and Taylor.
Thank you very much. Declarations of interest. Are there any today? No, and we have no members of the public who wish to make representation, so if we could move on to the minutes. And certainly the first set of minutes from the meeting on the 14th of March, other members of this committee will need to help me because I wasn't even elected to this august body at that point, so I have no idea if they are a true and accurate record. But if we can quickly go through them, it's a long time ago now, but you've got them with you. So page 1, is that okay? Page 2, page 3. And if we do these both for accuracy and points arising as well, because I think it's unlikely it would be a bit of a waste of time to go through them twice. So page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8, page 9, page 10, page 11, page 12, page 13, page 14, then we have the meeting that took place on Wednesday the 12th of July.
Could I just make a comment about the minutes from the 14th, Chair?
Yes, certainly.
I was the only one there. I was not aware that we had a stand-in for Councillor Webb on that day, but there's no issues with that. But I think going back to a discussion that we have had recently, I think what we need to be very careful of is within the Constitution, we do have something in there which allows a substitute to be made at short notice, which isn't a big issue. But I think for the PSB, I think is critical as well, because the understanding of what we're supposed to be doing. And I think if we start as group leaders substituting each other and shoving people in there just because they're in the building or I think we need to be wary of that and make sure that we just don't have members who are coming to make the numbers up or make a chorus or whatever. And I need to stress that as well, because leading to what we've just been talking about some time ago, would you bear that in mind, please, Hazel, and mention that to the team here? Understanding, I think, more than anything. Nothing worse than having 9 people in here who don't know what we're talking about. And it could happen, there's no doubt about that. All right, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. It's a point well made, because the reason we're on this select committee is because we have expertise from our own select committees. We're not just a randomly picked group of members. So that's a point well made. Thanks for that. So if we could move on then to the minutes of the meeting on July the 12th, and we're on page 15 in the agenda, page 16, page 17. Rather shorter meeting, that one. Okay, so they're a true and accurate record. I'll sign them later then. Okay, moving on to today's business then. The first item that we're going to consider today is the well-being plan. Who's going to introduce that one for us?
I'll begin that, if that's okay, Chair, and with other colleagues coming in. And if you don't mind, I'm just sort of very aware that over the course of this work, the makeup of the committee has changed. So may I just sort of go back and just set this in context a little, appreciating that there has been a session at the previous meeting, but just to make sure that people understand where we're at with this. So our responsibilities to produce a well-being plan come from the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, a relatively new and groundbreaking piece of legislation that requires local authorities, well, actually, what I should say, it's all public bodies, because very importantly, this is about the PSB, public bodies to plan for the future, looking up to 10, but ideally generationally, which is defined as 25 years ahead, to work collaboratively, to involve people, to look at preventative approaches and to develop integrated solutions. So over the course of the past year, culminating in a document that was approved by the PSB in the spring, we developed an extensive well-being assessment looking at the situation on the ground in Monmouthshire, in our communities, the strengths, some of the challenges that were being faced, and effectively sort of published this well-being assessment, which culminated with sort of 14 or 15 challenge and opportunity statements. We're now at the position, or the PSB are at a position, of needing to develop the well-being plan in response to some of those challenges. So this is a plan on behalf of all of the members of the Public Service Board, ourselves, Fire and Rescue, Gwent Police, and Iron Bevan Health Board, the RSLs, Natural Resources Wales, the voluntary sector, to jointly produce this plan. So this is the phase of work we're getting into at the moment. The timescales around it are that it needs to be published within 1 year of the last ordinary council election last May, which is a publication date of sort of 6th or 7th of May next year. But of course, once we take into account the timings of meetings, circulation of papers, but also most importantly, the need for a statutory 12-week public consultation on this, we get to the point where we have to have a draft plan in place for the PSB to look at on the 8th of November. So we'll be circulating that paper on the 1st of November. So what you have before you today to scrutinise and to look at, we have to say, unfortunately, is not a finished document, because simply we are working frantically to try and get that done within a relatively short time scale. But hopefully what we can have today is a very sort of open conversation around the structure of that plan, the sorts of issues that will be in it, which were informed by, as a starting point, a workshop that was held last Monday that we'll expand on and talk about, and a number of members of this committee attended. So we're at the phase of drafting. So the plan itself, if I sort of draw you back to the cover report, so we've got on page 20 of the bundle, page 2 of this report, 4 draft wellbeing objectives. So we're required to produce wellbeing objectives for the PSB. These are separate from those that we produce as a council, and which the council agreed with previous members back in March. There's an overarching purpose of building sustainable and resilient communities. And when we looked at and developed this, there were some very broad things which everyone, I think, wanted to achieve, but were perhaps so broad, or too broad, to be specific objectives. And that was around reducing inequalities between communities and within communities, supporting and protecting vulnerable people, and taking into account our impact on the environment. Very big, very aspirational, absolutely the right thing, but so big as to be very hard to say exactly what will we do around those. So working with the Public Service Board earlier in the year, we ended up with 4 well-being objectives, which you'll see on that page providing children and young people the best possible start in life, protecting and enhancing the natural environment, the challenges associated with demographic change, and creating opportunities for communities and businesses to be part of a thriving and well-connected county. So what we've been doing since this committee last met was meeting informally with partners to understand some of the challenges on the ground, recognising that this doesn't exist in a vacuum, something my colleagues are often reminding me of when I live in my little policy bubble and I think everything will happen naturally and easily. And we understand the reality of what's happening on the ground and the difficulties of delivering these things day to day. So we had some sessions with partners, and then a workshop with PSB members and others last Monday. And what we're trying to do with that is to say, if these are the well-being objectives, what is out there in terms of proven good practice that could start to address these? And actually, where these are more complex issues, who out there potentially has some of the thinking or ideas that we should be bringing back and implementing in Monmouthshire? Because we've got to recognise that this Act is a very different way of working from some of the things certainly we've done as a local authority in the past, where you expect to be making changes to process, and as a select committee, you can see the difference shifting from one quarter to the next. This is about addressing big societal challenges, and actually big societal challenges need different thinking and different ideas. And that's why really, the stage with this, that we're not bringing before you saying these are the solutions, these are the things we think are the concrete actions, because this is very much an exploration stage. So we held these workshops, we invited people from different sectors in, and we're having as many different conversations as possible to say, well, what could we possibly do around this? What are the potential solutions out there to help us tackle some of these? And some of the work which is in the wellbeing plan, what we have to do is produce, it says publish your wellbeing objectives and talk about your steps. Now, our conversation with the staff from the Commissioner's office has been very much along the lines of, what do you expect to see as steps? Because we're sort of quite used to producing smart action plans, specific with measures and timescales. What we're hearing back is they recognise what we're doing, and actually some of those steps may be as broad as commissioning research into how we can, or exploring potential solutions for. Because if the PSB want to do the right things, what we can't profess to do is have all the answers and get all of those in place between sort of September and November in 2017. If we do that, it's effectively trying to solve tomorrow's problems and challenges with some of the thinking of yesterday, and we might apply the wrong things. So that's sort of broadly the situation we're in.
Could I just ask a question on that then? So we need to submit A, B, C and D as our objectives, with a case behind each 4, yeah? And that's a 25-year, even long-term plan on them objective, yeah? Your briefing sheet for A, B, C and D will be, where is that? I because everybody has own aspirations. I say, let me tell you about B then. Addressing the challenge associated with demographic change. We all don't know what's going to happen in the next 4 or 5 years, do we? The reorganisation perhaps, or whatever. So that is a real difficult one. Or could it be demographic changes? We may create super surgeries. So instead of having 10 doctor surgeries in a big town, let's have one super surgery. So the demand on doctors is far easier because we don't have. Is that the type of thing we're looking at there? That'd be a 20. Yeah. I just trying to get my head around.
Yeah, potentially. I mean, the plan, we're looking 25 years ahead, but it doesn't mean, obviously, I know you appreciate this, we can refresh this plan and return to it and revisit it, which we must do at least once in every electoral cycle. But yes, absolutely right. Something like demographic change, it could be, we recognise young people are leaving the county. What do we need to do to retain, to create more affordable housing? A radical idea might be a new housing settlement. That's one way in which you could address that challenge. or you could look to very different models of housing. You know, some of the cities, for example, this is not something I'm advocating for Monmouthshire, you know, things like use of containers, you know, shipping containers to provide high density housing in urban areas. Probably not one for us, but it's been alert to all of those possibilities. So absolutely right, these are some of the big and radical solutions, rather than perhaps some of the band-aid and short-term fixing that our funding cycle would often have us looking towards.
The timescales on that, you've got like a couple of weeks now, haven't we, to actually put something in draft for council to say, right, we're happy for that to go out now. Is that going to happen? Or are we going to delay it by whatever?
Well, unfortunately, we don't really have much scope to delay. So what we've got to follow on from this is a few slides on some of the issues that started to emerge from the discussions last week. So what we want to do, our public consultation phase on this will begin in mid-November. What we're saying is we don't expect in mid-November to have all of the answers to the what we will do question when we go out to consult. We'll have some of those, but what we really want to do is throw it open to the community, to experts out there. And also, you know, we're one of, we've got 22 local authorities in Wales, but 19 PSBs. And there's a piece on the agenda we'll talk to later on sort of regional priorities, because some of this might be issues where other PSBs are grappling with the same problems, and we could work together on solutions. So we don't want to sort of put all our eggs in a basket early on in this process. We're really keen to get something out there informally. And what we did on Monday was start to put some of the emerging thinking onto our engagement platform, Monmouthshire Made Open. And then we'll actively sort of push that out there to people and say, you know, even ahead of the formal consultation, what do you think? What are your ideas? And push that out beyond our own boundaries to people like academics and industry experts who will have exposure to some of this thinking, where they might say, right, looking at what you're grappling with, we think this could be the sort of solution you need to investigate or commission. But it's going to be broad, it's not going to be easy, and we're not going to have the same sort of certainty that we would normally attach to say, council businesses around services. It's a big learning curve for us as officers, certainly. Yes, I'm just thinking, so if I just pick back underneath, I'd not mentioned there. Yes, so talking about the exercise last Monday, and what I'll do in a moment is put up a couple of slides on the issues that emerged from the session that we had. Before I do, let me just have a little look, just draw your attention to the appendices of that covering report. So Appendix 1 just gives you an overview of the process which we followed. So that's page 22 of the bundle. And then Appendix 2 is the format we're working on for the wellbeing plan itself. And apologies that we don't have a plan for you to look at and scrutinise. Unfortunately, that's the very nature of this. But hopefully what you can see in the headings there are the sorts of issues that we're writing about at the moment. Taking you through sort of the broad process that we've followed. And of course, some of this information will be familiar to members because it's parts of documents we've previously published. So, for example, a summary of the wellbeing assessment, that's something that this committee has previously scrutinised and looked at. And I think the key sort of information there, the objectives and what happens next, we can sort of talk through today. And then the third appendix to this document just gives you an overview of the session that we ran on Monday. And I know there's an opportunity to talk through that today. But Hazel, Sharon, before I move on to the slides and some of the issues we've pulled out, are there any sort of particular points from your experience you want to highlight in terms of both the process and the sessions that we had on Monday with the PSB members?
Yeah, just to expand a little bit about the workshop last week, we kind of made a point of inviting people along to those workshops who are experts in those fields, not necessarily from Monmouthshire. So we had some academics there and people from national organisations like Save the Children and Community Transport Association and things, because we kind of recognise that, you know, the whole idea behind the PSB is that it's not just doing the same old things, it's looking at perhaps doing things quite radically differently and looking for new and innovative solutions to things. So we wanted to broaden the kind of attendance out beyond the kind of usual suspects who are kind of ingrained in the subjects day to day, to include a broader kind of audience of experts as well, so they could kind of give different perspectives, experiences that they'd benefited from elsewhere. So that was good. And the other thing that I think worked really well about the workshop was, initially we'd thought about having 4 different workshops, one for each of the objectives separately. But the decision was taken with other PSB partners that that would probably be a missed opportunity, because then you just have all the, you know, environmental people together talking about the environmental issues, and you wouldn't get that kind of cross-fertilisation of ideas. And that was something that I think worked very well at the workshop. People started off in a group looking at the theme that their particular expertise was around. But then in the afternoon, people moved around to different groups to see what other groups had been talking about, and were able to give their expertise and insights into those other areas. And something that kind of came out, which Matt will probably talk about in a minute, is the number of links between different things. You can't look at anything in isolation. You know, when you were looking at say children and young people, it's not just all about schools and health and stuff. We were talking about in the environment group about the importance of green space and places where children can kind of run around and get outside and exercise, and you know, that linked with some of the economy comments around transport and the need for active travel and stuff. So it was actually really good at making those links between those all those different areas, and you realise then you can't look at those 4 objectives separately because they're so interconnected. So that was a positive.
I think it's worth
Sorry,
just
yeah. Just one bit that I wanted to add as well was around the engagement with our partnerships that sit under the Monmouthshire Public Services Board. So we've got a range of partnerships that are all multi-agency, service delivery agents, people that do the front door work quite often and are dealing with our communities and the issues and challenges that we face across the county. And we also held sessions prior to the workshop on Monday with the partnerships, and were encouraging them to kind of raise the challenges and things that they felt that the PSB also needed to be aware of from a service perspective. So we've tried to ensure that we've covered a whole range of people in the process in terms of how we've done the work that's brought us to this point, really. So we've had a whole sort of plethora of different lenses that have been applied to this information that we're trying to analyse at the moment, but it's just really to reassure scrutiny that we have been looking more broadly than just the workshop that we held on Monday. So.
Of the 4 towns, they're going to set their own objectives and their plans. Are we working with them because it's so important as Monmouthshire? As we know, we are putting a lot of the resources into the towns, but we do have the rural side of this. So if you want to do most things in Monmouthshire, you've got to go to the towns. So our plan is going to have to be built round towns also, even though they're going to build their own plans. This is the thing I can't up here. Are we going to make that interlink there? Because what their aspirations are and what our plan will be could be totally gone. How long have you got to do that? Because we haven't got very long, have we?
There has been some work taking place. I've met with Abergavenny Town Council, and I'm due to see Monmouth Town Council on the 23rd, and I'm hoping to go around the other town councils shortly. And the work that we're doing with them is to obviously raise what we're doing with the PSB, looking at the challenges, the opportunities that we have across the county, and in terms of them setting their objectives and identifying their plan to be able to deliver those objectives, we are trying to work with them to ensure that we're aligning that work quite closely and then linking that to our community groups as well. So we are trying to ensure that there's a clean line of sight from the community, town and community councils, all the way up to the PSB. So we're making that connectivity.
Perhaps from the chair, if I could say, as a member of Abergavenny Town Council, we certainly are beginning to focus now on this, and to help us to prepare for that, we've recently appointed a new town clerk who will be a full-timer rather than the current position where it was just more or less half-time. So I think we're certainly in a position, we know we've got to do it, and we're raring to go.
So if I just sort of pick up some of those slides, and then perhaps, if I talk about what's sort of come out from that workshop, and then, Chair, if you're happy with that, we'll go into some of the discussion around it, and maybe some of your views, because we did have the members of the Select Committee there on the day, and should also say as well, we did have the representatives from the town councils. So we had, yeah. Yeah, so all the larger town councils. In an ideal world, we would have liked to invite all the community councils as well, but the practicalities within a workshop setting meant we simply couldn't have the space. So we picked up on those covered by the Act. Paul, are you able to switch it over to the?
If you just press take, I don't want to take it out of its bracket, just in case it comes off.
Right, there we go. Apologies for that. So what you have is a hot off the press, I was just typing it outside before walking into the room, set of slides. That's how close we are, and that's why you don't have it in advance. So colleagues were working on this until yesterday. Worth mentioning, I appreciate you can't see that, but you've got a version of it in the papers. So we had a graphic artist there with us on the day, not paid for by the local authority, I shall hasten to add, all part of partnership working, as were the costs of the nice venue and teas and coffees on the day. So at no cost to the Monmouthshire Exchequer. But we had a graphic artist capturing some of this, and that means that when we produce the plan, we can use some of these images to share them and make them more accessible to people who may not be drawn to sort of larger documents. And it's the sort of thing that you can divide up into smaller chunks and put out on things like Facebook and Twitter to help people draw them in who may not normally be attracted to the Public Service Board document. And it was something that was discussed yesterday at the Future Monmouthshire seminar, or Future Monmouthshire workshop, how we make things more accessible to different audiences and present things in a way that different people appreciate and understand. So that's a sort of real skill, and Fran O'Hara, the graphic artist we used, is doing a second one of these based on the actions. But we didn't get to that until the end of the day, so she's sort of working on that based on what we're writing up at the moment. So broadly the discussion was around a number of themes. What we wanted to get towards was steps and actions, but we had a lot of partners there, so we took them through a journey, which was thinking about the future. What will people be doing that they weren't doing in 2017, and what won't they be doing? What are the sorts of activities that people in our community won't be doing? And that's that sort of discussion. If we look back to what the world was like 15 or 20 years ago, we didn't have social media. We didn't all carry mini computers in our pockets that enabled us to do our work and connect to people and have video calls with people on the other side of the world at no cost. And then thinking about that future, who would be involved in making it happen? Who are the partners? Who are the key players that can help us move to that future? And then probably the point that we need for the plan is what are the actions we need to take to make that future a reality. So we clustered around these 4 well-being objectives, and apologies because what's here is quite crude. Is everyone able to see the text on a screen? Is that adequate in terms of? I know even on my screen I took my glasses on to read it. So this is really emergent. This is not necessarily how it's going to be phrased in the final plan, but it does give you a flavour of the sorts of things which partners and other stakeholders feel need to be reflected in the plan. So better childcare provision. really big issue, and it comes out quite strongly in terms of people being able to get access to the labour market and tackle some of the differentials in wages, particularly the male-female earning differential. Because particularly in rural communities, that's a big issue. So if children and young people want the best possible start in life, we need good childcare. Opportunities for children to play outdoors, which is linked into the last one around obesity and healthy lifestyles. Yeah, how do we encourage that? How do we create those safe spaces? I know people have looked at exploring some of that. Things like street closures to run play days in school, in residential areas, so that children and families can get out and start to know their neighbours and develop different relationships and get used to climbing trees and using every space for physical activity. Better transport links, that's about opportunities for the very youngest children being able to get out, but also older young people being able to access training and the job market, so that they're not limited in their job search area and looking for those skills in the immediate vicinity of their home. Key relationships, school, families, whole life, and recognising, I think, that childhood is about more than education. Education is about more than a narrow set of academic qualifications. So there's very much conversations in this around the whole child. Very important that there are actions in this plan around the responsibilities of young carers, recognising that not all children have the opportunity of a normal childhood because they have caring responsibilities, either for siblings or a parent or grandparent. The importance in the skills for the industries of the future. Some of this is around curriculum, school curriculum, and Will, Chief Education Officer, was part of this group. But it's also an understanding what industry skills will be demanded in future, because we know the sorts of skills being developed in schools in Southeast Asia who are at the cutting edge of the tech industry, and it's ensuring that are we giving children here in Monmouthshire and in Southeast Wales access to the same skill opportunities so they can compete in those job markets of the future. A real need for preventative work to tackle intergenerational problems. This came in strongly from colleagues in the police, that they're sort of starting to see families now in the third or fourth generation presenting to them with issues. And it's around understanding how we involve earlier to break those cycles of dependencies and intergenerational problems. And with things like work and research that has been done by colleagues at Public Health Wales on preventing adverse childhood experiences, because we know the more adverse experience people have at a very young age, from exposure to alcohol or drug abuse or a parent being incarcerated, that increases their own likelihood of themselves adopting health-harming behaviours in future. So those were the sorts of issues. And there were 4 of these slides. Rather than sort of talk through all of them, Chair, is it okay if I pause after each one and invite any sort of comment or observation or thought then?
Okay, Councillor Pratt.
This has all got to be welcomed, and I really like the way it's all been set out on the report, and I love the visuals. I think that's brilliant. The one thing that concerns me is that this is such a massive task. You can't underestimate the size of this, and if you look into each different sector, it's a massive piece of work. And this is all taking place in, a backdrop of the most squeezed budget in the whole of Wales that we have here in Monmouthshire. The other thing that concerns me is the role of central government in actually setting the standards. And I was speaking, if we look at health and welfare, and something that comes up frequently at this time of year is hip fractures, and I was just talking about that earlier on. Now in Wales, and I made a few notes on this, we're in the bottom quintile of the whole of the UK for the outcomes of hip fractures. And this has a knock-on effect for social services, hospitals, the time people are in hospital. And yet, in Wales, in England, they have 6 things that have to happen within 36 hours of somebody having a hip replacement. This doesn't happen in Wales, and what happens in England, for every one of those hip fractures where all those 6 are met, they get £1,400 from the government. So there's an incentive for them to achieve those. In Wales, not one hospital has met the best practice tariff in the whole of Wales for these outcomes for hip fractures. So this is just one example. We have to identify, the Welsh Government has to identify repetitive processes and standardise them. So we have the same standards throughout the whole of Wales. Now, we can't influence that to any great degree. It's down to central government, but it has an enormous knock-on effect. People having their hips replaced, social services, the amount of people that are in hospital, all the beds that we can't get people in there because these things aren't happening. And I'm just using that as an example. So, to do with well-being, I think because health is devolved and, we don't seem, as I made the point earlier on, we don't seem to see as many health professionals within the meetings, etc., that we go to as maybe I'd like to see. But these issues have an enormous impact on our services, and they have a tremendous knock-on effect. And yet, there is no standard throughout Wales in hip fracture. If you go into a Costa Coffee in a hospital in Cardiff and you ask for a flat white, you get a standard flat white. If you go up to North Wales and ask for a flat white, you get the same standard. And yet in healthcare, we don't have these standards in place. So my concern is that obviously we've got an enormous task. It really is, we have got to make a start somewhere, and it is a long-term strategy. But I think until the Welsh Government put these standards in place throughout the country, it's going to be very difficult to actually raise the standard and get the outcomes for people that they need. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Councillor Pratt. Any comment about that?
Well, I think in terms of the challenge, you're absolutely right. I mean, I can't disagree at all, and thoroughly, understand absolutely what you're talking about there. In terms of health, obviously they're part of our public service board. They are one of those key partners. We didn't have, when we went out and spoke around this, a huge amount of feedback around perhaps some of the intricacies of the health system, which you so accurately describe. But actually, a lot of the same issues I was hearing on the news report this morning, around challenges within health, and the piece I heard was particularly around A&E and the number of trusts across the whole of the UK that are missing targets and have been missing targets over the past year. So I think it's a big challenge for us as a society. And you're right to say, in terms of the change in that system, that's something for Welsh Government. So it is a factor for us. It's something that we can't ignore. Nonetheless, in terms of this particular piece of work, it's something we can feed through in terms of evidence. But things like the mechanisms within health are largely within the control of that health body. So I think it's one of these issues where the PSB is trying to work on issues that requires a joint response on which none of those partners can work on in isolation. However, I think what's important is that when they're not tackling those problems, that there's a voice at the PSB to be able to raise that up, because ideally it's issues where we work on integrated together. For example, so the PSB won't deal with it's not sort of issues that we have in terms of things like our day-to-day service delivery, be it waste collection or highways, and similarly it doesn't tend to get involved in things like operations, waiting times and A&Es, because that's purely within a health remit. But you're absolutely right, we have to recognise when those issues in the system create pressures elsewhere and result in sort of challenges or issues bubbling up in other services, like pressure on health and social care and more society-wide issues. So I can't offer you an answer. I totally understand the issue and why it's been raised. I think it's one of those the PSB need to be sort of broadly aware of, and as with any issue in public services, if there are issues which the PSB can work on and work with the ABUHB on joint solutions, I think that's something that a challenge they'll have to rise to in future.
Councillor Howard.
Out of the 8 bullet points there, you, or we, you, not me, will have to measure somewhere along the line of what we've achieved. Would that be on a yearly basis or on a 2-yearly basis? Because some of them bullet points are, I mean, they're long term, aren't they? I.e., within the plan. How will you report that back then? I.e., the good things about it, or the good things that is happening there, or the negative things that are happening there, positives and negatives? How will you code them? So in the first year, let's say better child care provision. Will we bullet point it 1 to 10? We've got to number 3 in the first year. Is that what's going to happen with this? I just understanding how we would measure the outcomes of our aspirations within the board, because they'll have to report back on some of these to us. Your aspirations of putting these in place, how we've done in Monmouthshire and how we've done within the region. How would you measure that?
It'll be a real mix of things, and as we sort of mentioned earlier on, what it's not going to be is perhaps some of the reports that a lot of our select committees have dealt with in terms of sort of quarterly measures of process. And some of these issues we won't see shift for, if we're successful, 4, 5, 6, 7 years. Mm-hmm. So in those cases, it will be reporting back on milestones. We may not see shifts in reduced childhood obesity for a period of time, mm-hmm. but there will be steps we're taking. So we would report back on those steps to say this has been delivered or this hasn't been delivered. And sometimes, and we won't create systems for the sake of creating systems because we want the resource to go where it matters, but where they're of measuring things like satisfaction, be there our own local surveys that are already in place or things like the National Survey for Wales, then we can pull that in alongside some of the milestones. So I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all solution to this particular one, because some of these will move in a much shorter timescale. Some of them are more easily measured numerically in terms of the proportion of people that have a condition or the number of people reporting into a service, something like that. Others are much harder to tackle. And a lot of the data, it's not going to be local authority data. There's a national set of 46 wellbeing indicators that Welsh Government have set. So we'll draw on those wherever possible. Sometimes it'll be existing measures and sometimes we'll have to create new ones. So there's not a neat answer to it. And for each of those projects, we're going to have to consider how it's evaluated and set out an evaluation frame for it and timescales for evaluation. So, as these come forward as definite projects, because right now we have is a potential list, and many that the PSB will be looking at and saying, yeah, we think that one's in, we can resource that. And actually some of these will say, yeah, possibly, but we'll just do numbers 1 and 2 in the first year. And if we're successful, we'll start the third one in year 3 and have a phased approach, because we got to recognise there's 10 things there across 4 objectives. There's no way we can run 40 programmes of work. It'll be a sense of prioritising. So we will come back to a smaller number, each one with an evaluation framework and method around it. And then that'll be brought before this committee to scrutinise and assess progress.
Just follow on from that, because the tendency for a lot of this is we will, I'll use a rough word, we'll water this down and decide which ones we're going to do. There's a tendency within the big umbrella that, well, let's look at the easy ones. Well, sometimes the easy ones are not the critical ones, and for me it's the critical ones which mean a lot to the people of Wales on what we can achieve here. So it may be the last bullet point, focus on reducing child obesity. It may be something on the basis of this, we need to get them kids out there, we need to get them out the house, we need to get them exercising, and all them little things. Now that may be the aspirations of 43 in here, but it may not be the aspirations of others somewhere else. How are we going to make that challenge that it's what we believe or we want to happen, not what somebody sitting in an ivory tower wants to happen? Because pressure will come from other places as well. We can't do that one, but it may be the most important one, or is that up to us to make that decision?
Well, it's up to the PSB, in terms of, it's the PSB that approve this rather than the local authority. And all of those partners, the majority of those partners will be represented at the PSB. So at that point, when they approve a plan, they are signing up on behalf of their organisation to deliver these things as priorities and to focus their energy. And once they've said that, as a scrutiny committee, you can make sure that you're able to hold them to account. And potentially then that's not just that individual, it's that organisation that you're holding to account for their
So the representatives on the PSB from this authority, let's say, will have their agenda of what they want to take there, yeah? When do we make that decision then? Have we agreed to that agenda? As a
well, the plan will be brought to council for endorsement. So it's a PSB decision with a council endorsement, and the council date, I haven't got the exact date in front of me, is late February, early March. It's on the planner for. So obviously the scrutiny in the run up to that will be through this committee, and I think this committee next meets in January. So in January, you'll have something far more concrete, and you'll be effectively scrutinising that from a PSB scrutiny angle, but also then you'll be undertaking that scrutiny before that goes through to council for that endorsement prior to PSB decision.
Councillor Pratt.
Can I just say I totally agree with Councillor Howarth. We've got to have quantifiable standards, and it's all very well say we want to make it better, but how much better? Where are we now, and where do we want to see ourselves going? Otherwise, I think there's a real worry for me that we're just going to scratch the surface. And because it is such an enormous, each one of these areas is so massive. And I think it's going to be very difficult for us to actually decide where we're going to concentrate our efforts. And for me, health and obesity and, the real issues that are out there around health. I mean, it does include it does influence everybody. It's got to be the planners have got to be involved. It's right across the culture, the council. We need a complete culture change. We need to be thinking about well-being with every decision that we make. But I am just very concerned that we are going to end up just being on the periphery of it and not really tackling it. So I agree, we've got to have quantifiable standards. Thank you.
Before we move on, I'd just like to say from the chair that I think members have actually hit an important nail on the head here in terms of our scrutiny role, that it's very difficult for us to scrutinise the work of other agencies within the overall plan. But certainly it's something that we need to keep very focused on if we're going to be effective in our scrutiny role. I also think there are, of course, huge areas with my committee of children and young people in particular where we will be able to hold the board very closely to account. And I bang on all the time about the performance of looked after children, children who qualify for free school meals and so on. And in common with every other local authority, our children in Monmouthshire who fall into those categories perform far worse than other children in our schools. And I think there are areas where we clearly will be the lead agency and will be held to account. And I would hope that other agencies will also be looking to how they can hold us to account for that. And there are very clear links, for example, with the health authority with children with special needs, the provision of therapy and so on in a whole range of cases. And I think there are opportunities where we can hold to account, and we will certainly need to do our very best to do that. Okay, shall we move on to the second of the priorities then?
Okay, so this is sort of protect and enhance the resilience of the natural environment whilst mitigating and adapting to the impact of climate change. Again, just to qualify this, it's a sort of very much a work in progress. And indeed, as I said, I was doing this outside, so Hazel may look at this and say, oh, you've missed something. So Hazel, please do come in and correct if my haste to get this ready for the committee today has missed out key key issues. But some of the things were around a focus on a sustainable food supply. And we've heard a lot in the news, politics aside, recently in terms of our departure from the European Union and what that means for food supply. But there's also the environmental aspects to that as the world changes. We should focus on procurement to support local production and services. We see this at a local authority level. Sometimes we enter into national agreements around procurement, and you may get some financial savings, but potentially what you often do is move towards bigger national or international suppliers. And then, from the environmental aspect, what you're sometimes incurring with that, things like food miles, if it were food supply, additional transport costs, CO2 emissions, but then also lost opportunities for local and businesses in our region of the UK. To compete and create jobs and so on, which are the lifeblood then for our communities. Coordinating landscape scale biodiversity action. Hazel, please correct me, or just step in and explain this in a far better way than I will.
That's basically recognising, we've got lots of good habitats in Monmouthshire, but if you've just got like a little island of woodland surrounded by, a built-up area or surrounded by just grassland or whatever, then if our habitats are not connected to each other, then, if that habitat's put under pressure from development or climate change and stuff, species can't move and can't migrate. So the whole kind of emphasis really in kind of biodiversity and managing land is to increase the connectivity of habitats to give that flexibility for species to be able to move. And we were also talking about it's tied in with that bullet point there, looking at how we can manage our land better as a county to alleviate flooding elsewhere. And there's a project going on in Monmouth that we talked a bit about at the moment that Transition Monmouth are doing, which is looking at where flooding happens in Monmouth, historically, and then looking at, the drainage basin, looking at how land is managed, whether there's areas where you can perhaps do tree planting that would slow down the rate that water gets into the rivers and then causes flooding, or reduces the amount of surface water runoff, because as we kind of build more and tarmac over things more, you haven't got that natural kind of soak away, and water goes a lot more rapidly into drains and stuff and causes problems if it's very fast. So that's looking at the potential to change the way that we manage land, working with farmers, working with, people like NRW, landowners, looking at our own estate and looking at whether there's things that you can do to kind of naturally slow down water from getting into the water supply.
Do you want to keep going? Because you did this group, didn't you? You
yeah.
far more,
okay.
Far better than I do. I can tell from that description.
Okay. Looking at, and this cropped up in lots of different groups actually, active travel and better public transport, both to reduce carbon emissions, in Usk and Chepstow in particular. We've got air quality management zones where air quality regularly breaches the kind of standards. But also active travel, promoting more walking and cycling, which has got environmental benefits, but also health benefits. We thought there was a lot of potential to be producing more energy locally and supplying the grid locally, and that involves, working with communities, working with people like Western Power, and looking at, building more kind of local production of energy. And the last point that was talked about quite a bit, I think in other groups too, was looking at how we design and plan kind of new builds, looking at the kind of standards that new builds need to be, looking at how we build communities to ensure that kind of services are provided locally. You're not just building, packing the houses in as densely as possible to maximise the financial benefits, but then perhaps losing a lot of benefits about, what's good about living somewhere. Lots of statistics around, if you look out of your window and you can see some trees, mentally it's a lot better for you. The police came along to this workshop and were saying, if people are really densely packed, you're far more likely to get crime and antisocial behaviour than if you've got, more carefully thought out kind of estates or housing. So that was thinking about how we build and how we design.
So, Chair, if we were to pause and for questions.
Any questions on that? Councillor Pratt?
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, this is really welcome, and for somebody who spent some time this week on the mountain dealing with the mess made by Costain to manage the lapwing migration and the future of the lapwings, and up to my knees in mud. I appreciate what you're saying. We have areas of quite severe rural deprivation here, and also we have really enormous challenges as far as flooding is concerned. And the problems that we have in my ward is that, you know, I've got a lady that lives near me, and I don't want to get, you know, parochial on this, but because of the squeezed budgets of the council, we've got drains and land management that hasn't been properly addressed for very many years. And, you know, I request this work to be done in a beautiful area. I mean, this is the Cliddart Gorge, and we're not managing the area at all because there's just not the resources to do what's required. And that is a great concern for me. And we also, you're quite right, we should be harnessing the water. I'm surrounded by, waterfalls, and yet we're not harnessing that and, you know, creating energy from it. So there's an enormous amount of work to do in this area, but I think at the moment, we may have aspirations for the future, and we've got to have those aspirations. But at the moment, we're not even addressing the basic issues of managing flooding and water and drainage because we just haven't got the resources as a county council to do that. And it's been neglected for years. And I'm not really sure what the answer to that is, especially when we've just heard that we've had our budget cut again. Because you need special equipment to go up there. You can't just take a standard piece of equipment up Llanelli Hill to sort out the drains. They have to take small equipment that's expensive, so it's very costly work. That's the excuse I've been given anyway.
Yeah, if we can get a comment on that, and then Councillor Howarth.
And it talks only to part of that, really. And I think absolutely sure everything you're saying again, and the budget challenge is one that we're grappling with at the moment for next year. I think in terms of the looking to the future and some of those issues you talk about, like drainage, what we need to do through this legislation is really build and design for the future, so that those challenges that communities are grappling with today are designed out for the new communities of tomorrow. So, for example, if you know the Monmouthshire housing site down right on the edge of the county, I was there a couple of weeks ago in heavy rain, and John Keegan was explaining to me, well, everything that runs from their building and their car park sits in an underground reservoir and slowly seeps into the drainage system. So rather than contributing en masse to and blocking the drains with overcapacity, it's a slow sort of runoff, some of it into the land, the clean water, and then the grey water into the drainage system at other times. So it's about building some of this and ensuring that we take this as an opportunity to build that in when we design the communities of the future, like the energy, the hydropower and so on, to make sure that we think as a public body ourselves. So when planning committee are looking at things, they consider these aspects. But then wider schemes also take it into account. So there is no one easy solution, but what we're trying to do is in this to future-proof and give us the best chance using the thinking that will stop these problems arising in future.
Yeah, I think you've made a very valid point there, and I think all of us could sit in here for the next 6 months and talk about things which we've got big problems with. The long term, you're quite right. I think the new scheme we've going up through my area, big issues with water. They've done exactly what you're talking about there, holding the water, making sure that when it goes into our streams, etc., into our rivers, it's actually been filtered as best it can. But it's massive investment, and I think everything we talk about today is all about cash. But we do have a long-term strategy in the future, because we've got things like the SIL, Community Infrastructure Levy. It's important that we actually push things like that forward, because to deliver some aspirations that we're looking for, we're going to need the cash. The people out there with cash, and they are there, we just need to get it off them to deliver things within Monmouthshire and within Wales, really. And I think legislation is, you have to do this before you build a site, whether it's in Barry or Puthcall or in Gilwan or in, you've got to do this. This is what we want. And we have to stick to that. And I think the tendency we have is we don't stick to things. We veer off and let people not do it. And I think it's up to probably different bodies to actually make sure that it's adhered to. And if it's not adhered to, we have to come down on them heavy. I think if you go back, a lot of problems we do see. Go back to the issue of probably in 2012-13, unadopted pipes and sewers. Whereas we have major issues in Monmouthshire and major issues in Wales where builders were building developments in the 60s and 70s, they weren't even doing the job right. Nowadays we have building inspectors which actually make sure them jobs are done right. And I think things like this we have to make sure within the environment they stick to what it says on the tin. Don't take the sticker off and chuck it away and do whatever you want. So I think long term, yeah, you're right, and I think we have to get there, but I think the PSB and all these people have to take this seriously, and are they taking it seriously? I surmise they're not, because it all boils down to big cash. And I think that's the direction, is where we get the cash from to do these big things, because they are important. Do we build? I remember the last LDP, I was looking for a new community within Monmouthshire. We got the land, yeah, but what do? We don't do that. We look at actually increasing our towns and our areas with more and more development where we haven't got the structure around it. Just them things, let's think outside the box. So there are opportunities there. I wish I could deliver all these, but then you may have a lot of people say, I prefer your slide before. They might matter to a lot of people, see, and that's the balance, isn't it? Is which box which asterisk you're going to take in all that, because you aren't going to please them all, are you?
Yeah, but absolutely right. And obviously one of the things through the Act we're trying to do is with every one of these is you know, we got this principle of integration, is thinking, right, if we are delivering this, how can we maximise the impact on other areas as well? So you're absolutely right, and this is why we need to be thinking differently and applying that very different thinking that you talk about with this Act, to say, well, actually, if we are introducing, say, a totally random example, say it was a hydroelectricity scheme, you think, well, how do you also design in walking routes around that so people can enjoy it as the countryside and get out and be active around that space? And actually then when you're developing that scheme, how can you use your tendering and your procurement process in such a way that local businesses have the opportunity to compete for that work? So it's around thinking as broadly as we can and hitting as many of those objectives with single projects. And some of the stuff we'll come on to about transport is one of those great ones. You know, if you get good public transport, not only do you increase people's access to job markets, you potentially put more money in their pocket because they're having to own less cars, and you're also reducing air pollution, which has an impact on health. So it's thinking really which of these schemes could pay back for us in multiple areas. But yeah, absolutely agree with you on the points you make there.
Yes, certainly, go on.
Just as well to say, a reminder that the legislation is very much about the PSBs need to be contributing to multiple goals, to all of the goals, all 7 of the goals, and we can't be picking and choosing. So, the PSB needs to kind of, as it develops this plan, has an overview, it needs to ensure that it is contributing to all of the wellbeing goals, not just perhaps picking out some of the ones it kind of likes the most or seem the easiest. We've got to be doing all of them. Just also something else that you said about, who's kind of really behind this. And, certainly NRW are very, very much hot on all this agenda and stuff. And they're very involved in the project that's happening in Monmouth to look at how we manage land to reduce flooding downstream. And just to kind of make the point that actually looking at kind of soft interventions like that probably are a lot more low cost than the kind of hard engineering solutions at the end of the line. So although some things, when you're building new houses, you have got to think about, you might have additional cost if you want them to be very high spec environmentally. But there are options and ways of managing our land, things which actually are low cost and can reduce problems in a much more low cost way than some of the kind of more hard engineering things, particularly when it comes to flooding.
Okay.
But flooding is a problem which was created in the 60s because we didn't put big enough pipes in. We didn't do put just simple stuff. Whereas now you talk to an engineer, we will never put them pipes in because they're no good for this day and age. But is that pipe we're fitting in that ground now big enough? Next 25 years? Probably not. So it's everything moves, doesn't it? And that's why this is important. We're talking about, not about us, not about the future. And putting a 12-inch pipe in to take water away, is it even big enough now for the future? Probably not. Probably need an 18-inch pipe. So that's why it's important we actually look at what is best to do here, not what is best to do for 5 years or 6 years. The 5-year plan which town and community councils are building, I don't think it's good enough. I think it should be a 10-year plan or even a 15-year plan, because people come and go, things change. I quite agree, this needs rubber stamping, probably a 25, 30-year plan. That's the goal. If you don't hit that goal, we want to know why. We won't be here, we all know that. But the people behind us will say, well, you made mistakes, guys. We've got to pick the can up. And we're saying, I've mentioned 2 big mistakes which happened in the 60s and 70s there, which we're picking the can up for now. That's not going to happen.
Okay, can I thank colleagues for those comments, well made, and let's move on to the third priority.
Okay, so this was the developing opportunities for communities and businesses to be part of an economically thriving and well-connected county. If I pick up on the first couple, and Sharon, I know you facilitated this group, so I'm conscious you will have quite a bit to contribute on some of these. The first one I'll start on is the potential to develop a sort of rural Uber. I assume people are all familiar with Uber. There we go. All right. Yeah, exactly. Use it in Cardiff, and actually, it's something which isn't open to a lot of people in our rural communities on the same level. And actually, could we develop a rural Uber type scheme? So that's something we're exploring at the moment, and Mike Powell in the RDP team has secured some European funding for us to explore it. We've found some potential, or Mike has found some potential solutions in North America, and we're looking at this on a city deal level with a group that the chief exec of Torvine is chairing, that I sit on. So we're exploring the potential to open up some of the data that we have to enable other transport providers to provide different transport solutions in Monmouthshire that would complement the existing bus service. So that's early stages. It will be a while, but those are the discussions that are happening around that at the moment, because that was one of the big challenges from the wellbeing assessment, and probably something I imagine as councillors you hear quite frequently in wards and around the county, the difficulties of transport and accessing services. That links into access to the job market, and it's more than about the transport, but you've got things like childcare options there, and also on one of the later points, things like broadband. Increasingly in future, less people will be travelling to workplaces, as those of us that are officers of this council are able to do. We'll be accessing work locations remotely, and increasingly technology enables people even to do manual tasks remotely. Control robots for surgery or for drilling and for other industries from remote locations. So it's more than around the physical transport in terms of access to the job market. Work on a business network. We have a lot of micro enterprises in Monmouthshire, and I think I won't get the figure right, so I'm going to try and quote a number, but I think we have more micro enterprises than any other county in Wales, perhaps outside of Cardiff. But what we tend to see is those businesses which are less than 5 employees don't tend to grow and scale. And also at that scale, it's much harder to get access to some of the business insight and intelligence that the larger businesses have access to. And that'll include industries like farming and smallholders, in terms of how technology can be used to get the best out of crop yields and so on, and understand when soils need to be left fallow to maximise the potential of crop yields and so on, but without exhausting the land and degrading the soil. So could creating a business network and getting access to more insight help those smaller businesses to grow and get access to opportunities normally available to larger businesses? So very early stage discussion, but something in the group last week they were very keen on, weren't they, Sharon?
There's a lot of benefits, I think, to having that network and pulling the businesses together. And I think, I'm sorry, let me see the screen there, Matt. Yeah, and I think some of the figures that we were talking about in that session was around the 4,500 businesses in Monmouthshire, and 90% of them only have 10 or less employees. So it gives you some idea of the kind of, whilst we have a lot of them, the scalability of them at the moment is quite small, and we need to be looking at how potentially a network could support that and increase that intelligence around it. And likewise then we went into the conversations around the to capitalise on City Deal, but also recognising the types of industries that we have a lot of in the county, and the potential industry sectors that we need to be thinking about attracting, because the impact on wage levels, whilst we have a lot of businesses, a lot of them are centred around the tourism, food production, and they're quite low paid industries. Some of the larger companies that we have operating in the county, again, are retail industries and not paying necessarily the high enough wages that we would be looking to try to raise the wage levels of the county, which links to the affordability, which again links into the opportunities then for different types of industry, different types of skill sets, and how we can link that with our education system so that we're providing those opportunities to children and young people to move into perhaps apprenticeships or into jobs or into more skilled areas that they can actually stay and work within the county, and can afford then to live within the county. So the connections are there between all of the objectives really as we were discussing some of these things. And then also there was a lot of talk about exploiting the unique selling points that Monmouthshire has. So the things that we have and the things that we do really well, could we not be looking at potentially growing our area of excellence, specialising it? Why are we not marketing what Monmouthshire does to the rest of Wales and the UK and particularly our border areas, and encouraging people to come and to study and to train and to work in the county around these areas of expertise that we have? So is there a way of creating a sort of a specialist sector within Monmouthshire, looking at things such as our food, our hospitality, our agriculture, and our tourism and technology? So they're things that we could aspire to do, building on some of the unique selling points and the assets that we have here currently. So it was quite a broad discussion in that group really, and floated quite a few ideas for us to consider.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, I think on that group, I'm thinking Councillor Pavia was part of that discussion on the day, and we also had I think sort of 3 of the 4 town councils present on that particular discussion. So we were getting a good sort of breadth of views from people that weren't always, not always the business specialists as well, but those broader community views.
Okay, Councillor Howard.
Yeah, as again, aspirational and long-term, brilliant. The only criticism I would have is at the end, in all this, is it all costs cash, doesn't it? Centre of Excellence, give you a niche. Members won't know. Not many years ago, we looked at Abergavenny at creating a hub up in the old school up by the leisure centre. Remind me, I forgot its name now. Up by the leisure centre in Abergavenny.
Oh, the youth centre on.
No, the big place.
King Henry.
The Hill. There was a lot of work done in that, in looking at creating some centre of excellence there, and at the end of the day, and I think we were probably looking at some receipt from the Morrisons issue, but I don't want to go into it too much, but at the end of the day, it all revolves around cash. It does, and they are aspirational, these things. If we had a magic wand, it'd be brilliant to do it. We are a county of 90-something thousand, just. We're a rural county. we can't have the aspirations of what the big cities have and all them things. We've got to either run with them to a point, or we've got to have our own tree with a small branch of it. And I think that's the problem we do have, is we put a lot of time and energy into doing things which actually are going to be non-deliverable and non-achievable. And I think what we need to do as an authority is actually the other bullet points that we had within the first two slides, the real serious things, especially the first one and what we picked from them. This one is all going to be about probably a real difficult one to deliver, a real difficult one. And I'd like to see how that will be the measure for me on this. We talked about the internet. I think we've discussed for many weeks and months and years about broadband. We've got the lovely green cabinets sitting on the roadside there. Are they fibre optic? Everybody doesn't even know what fibre optic means, because most people have overhead power cables going for the telephone. I'll never have fibre optic in the memory of man, because they'll never run a cable to my place. That will never happen. Fibre optic is a cable. My overhead cables are copper. The cost of doing things. So all them things long term are going to be non-achievable. In your towns, planners, fibre optic. No estate should be built within Monmouthshire, or no development without having fibre optic to that front door. But they are, because we should stipulate. But no, we seem to go in another direction of having things which, oh well, put extra couple of footpaths in and things like that. We need to think outside the box with all this. Uber, no problem with Uber. I use Lyft whenever I travel because they're better than Uber. Only on the basis of it, there are things out there, and I think that's a brilliant for communities, but it all revolves around cash. Will your man, who's giving you a cheaper price than a company from wherever, want to come out to you cheaper? So it all revolves around cash. It's great. Let's have a look at it. And I think how we measure things like that are brilliant. I think that's a wonderful one. But I'd like to see how we're going to slim this one down. I look forward to that one.
Thank you, Councillor Howarth. This is a recurring comment that we're making this morning, isn't it? You know, where's the economic underpinning to make this happen? Councillor Pratt.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. I mean, I think this is a really key issues we're dealing with here. And we've still got the situation. Interesting statistic that I read recently was that the stamp duty collected in Chelsea and Kensington is the same as the stamp duty collected in the whole of Wales. So that kind of puts into perspective, you know, how we're still very much concentrated in London and the south. And, you know, that's got to change. And we've got a real opportunity in Wales. We have got a brilliant offer. And we have got, you know, tourism. I mean, my background was hotel and catering, and I went to a College of Excellence in London. But we don't have anything like that here, and you know, we've got some of the best restaurants in the country here, and so there is certainly opportunities there to really embrace that. But you know, it is going to take investment, and you know, it's beyond, you know, it's going to have to be the Welsh Government in Cardiff Bay that really lead this. And I think we need to be more outward looking if we're going to really grasp the global markets and enable our producers of food, for example, to really make the most of the opportunities. We have got to have a government in Cardiff Bay that is outward looking and is ready to embrace those global markets. So I think, you know, this is an ambition for the future, but once again, if we don't have the lead from the Welsh Government, we're not going to move as quickly on this as we need to.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Do you want to make a comment on that, or should we move on to the fourth priority?
We'll move on, but only a brief one, and it's that keyword, I think, is ambition. And you know, I think probably if we look back 3 years ago, probably none of us could imagine that as a local authority we would own a compound semiconductor manufacturing foundry. And probably 5 years ago we wouldn't have thought, well, you know, we could be bringing £65,000 a year jobs to the area. And some of that has Welsh Government support, but a huge amount of that was the ambition and drive of people, elected members and officers in this county. And I think that's true with a lot of this, that sometimes if we start to have these ideas, we can put some evidence base behind those ideas and make a case. Actually, we can start to bring a lot more partners to the table. And some of this stuff will cost, but others, like the transport stuff, if we open up our data in new ways, actually people that develop these apps and so on, they are willing to come and work here, and they're not looking for money to do it, because they generate their revenue from other areas. So you're surprised how many businesses and how many large organisations approach us to say, if you could do this, we're interested in working with you. So absolutely recognise the challenge. We don't want to be naive going into this, but at the same time, it's important that we retain that sense of ambition that you rightly describe, because it is achievable. And if we don't have this ambition for Monmouthshire, then there'll be other small nations and regions around the world that have it for their area, and they'll be the ones leading these industries in future. It's good. Hazel, I've got the presentation on my screen, so Hazel can't message me to tell me to speed up. Hazel, how am I doing?
Not too bad.
Not too bad. That's just please speed up, isn't it? So the fourth one. I'll rattle through this one because yours are the important voices. The challenges associated with demographic change. So this is the issue. We've got a lot of young people leaving the county. It's hard for young people to live and work here. At the same time, we have the ageing population, which brings huge benefits, but also challenges in terms of things like health and social care. So on the housing front, some of the things being talked about are a new settlement or substantially increasing the supply of housing, particularly in the south of the county where the demand is. That would be a policy decision for council, but it's something which has been raised as something that would be a radical solution to the supply of housing. Thinking around the population that we have and work that we're doing quite a lot on as a council is around active citizenship, volunteering, time banking, really making the best of the social capital and the skills that exist in our communities. And some of that can help us deal with the generational issues in different ways. Drawing out far more sort of volunteering to contribute to things locally, because we know we have those skills and abilities within our communities. One of the other things that's emerging very much around the demographic change and looking to the older end of the population is around the continuation to develop a care system which is built far more on reciprocal relationships and communities, alongside the transactional model of care. And I know our colleagues in health and social care are doing a huge amount around this. So people have very different relationships with their care provider rather than the 15 minutes of care here and the half an hour there. It's far more of a two-way relationship where things are co-produced. And there's the potential for us in Monmouthshire, and I think we are starting to lead the way in some of that work, to give people a much better experience of care services at the stage in life when they need them. So it's a big one. It boiled down to a mix of care things, of housing provision around stopping the flow of young people out of the county. And of course, with all of this, there are strong overlaps with some of the things we discussed earlier on, like the skills, those sort of centres of excellence that were talked around, to make this an attractive place, that even if young people do leave the county when they're 18 to go to university, to college, actually we have a vibrant and thriving county for them to return to, so that when they're ready to start up their own businesses and have their own families at that point in life, they do that in Monmouthshire rather than the South East or in Bristol, and help us have that sort of sustainable local economy.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I can certainly relate to that as the father of two kids who've grown up with much better Welsh accents than I've got, neither of whom now live in Monmouthshire. Have we got any questions or comments on that final priority? Okay. Does that wrap up this agenda item then? Just for the minutes, if I could summarise that Mr. Gatehouse and his colleagues have certainly brought to us this morning a detailed report of where we are now in terms of identifying our priorities moving forward, discussing with colleagues in other agencies, and the urgent need now to produce the draft report for public consultation so that we're meeting our statutory deadline of publication by next May. So if I could thank the officers for facilitating our questions and comments this morning. And if we move on then to the next agenda item, which is a verbal one, it is the feedback from the workshop last Monday. And if I could kick this one off from the chair, because I was one of 3 members of standing committees who attended. I think that positives included meeting people from other agencies to see that, yes, there is a move afoot to think about working collaboratively. For example, a woman from the Health Authority was talking to me saying that she always watched the live streaming of Children and Young People Committee. So that she was aware of issues arising there. Part of her brief was to provide therapy support from a medical point of view. So that was really positive to know that that is going on. And just the ability to talk to people from other agencies so that we really are focused on pulling together these priorities that we've now successfully identified. On the slightly more negative side, I did think that it was still dominated by county council affairs in terms of members of the county council being there, officers of the county council being there. I noted that, for example, both the chief executive and the deputy chief executive of this authority were there. The same was not true of all the partner agencies. And I think that was a slight negative and was noted at the time. I also think it showed that we've probably got quite a long way to go in stopping people just thinking within their own particular box. And certainly in the priority one, the best start in life that I attended, the workshop, too many people talking only in terms of their particular contribution, running a nursery or whatever. And I made the point, well, it's okay talking about all these grandiose things, but if a child hasn't got a roof over its head to go to sleep in at night, then where's the well-being of that child? So positives and negatives, but from the point of view of those driving this forward on our behalf, Mr. Gatehouse, any comments?
My own reflections on the day, I always set out with these things with an incredible sense of ambition and sometimes an unrealistic expectation of what we can achieve. So I always walk away initially slightly disappointed. But then when I reflected back on the day, what I was very pleased with actually, notwithstanding the comments from the chair, was the number of people in a room of 60, 65 people that I didn't know. And actually, we're a small organisation, and you go places and you go to meetings and we know everyone because it's the same people wearing a slightly different hat. And we did get a number of new faces there, and probably around a third of the people there I'd never met before. That was quite encouraging. But I do recognise those issues. It's very hard for us, and this way of working is a new mindset. And I do recognise those comments that people talk about the things they know. They talk about their agencies and their particular areas of work. And for those of us, like the members of this committee, and over time start to live and breathe this stuff, we really believe that this is the way forward. But we have to recognise a lot of our colleagues out there are having fleeting exposure to this way of working. And changing mindsets and changing how we work to have that real long-term focus and that collaborative way of doing things, and not being afraid to switch off how we do things and think of radically different ways. That's going to be new to a lot of our colleagues, and so I've got to recognise that yes, I certainly had some of the same experiences, and this is something that we need to persist with, to keep communicating, to keep engaging, and to make sure that people recognise the importance of this, because we know this world our communities are facing some pretty complex challenges, and we can't solve them doing them exactly the same things we're doing now. It's that different thinking, and what I say, it was a positive step in the journey, but it's not enough. It's not going to get us there by itself.
Before I bring you in, Councillor House, any other comments from officers who were there from their perspective, Hazel?
I think I take your point very much about lots of council officers there, but actually when you think about when we tried very hard when we were putting together the kind of invite list to try and make sure it wasn't too council-y, but actually when you look at the County Council in comparison with the other organisations that are on the PSB, the kind of remit of the council is so broad. We deal with education, we deal with social services, we build things, we've got planning, we've got countryside, we've got housing. Actually, that's so much broader remit than any of the other bodies on the PSB that it was difficult to narrow it down. So I do take your point, and we did try hard to kind of limit the number of council officers there. But actually, when you look at the breadth of work that the council did, and you look at those 4 themes, to kind of miss the council out or have less, the council amongst the officers, we've got so much different expertise, so many different areas of expertise. That's why it was a challenge and why there was quite a lot of council people there.
Thanks for that. Having made that comment, I was there, and I'm certainly glad that I was there. So thank you for the invite to me. Councillor Howard.
Yeah, I think it's the same old thing, isn't it? It's having the balance. My only concern I do have is do we have enough time? Are we doing things right on putting the message over what this is all about, understanding? And I still believe perhaps we need a simpler package for understanding. The checklist, back of every reports and things like that. Will members of the public actually understand what that checklist is about? And I think that's so important, that making sure when we have the checklist at the back of reports to make sure, does it meet this, does it meet that, understanding. And I honestly, perhaps having people there who understand is a better tool than having not many there who understand, and a lot of people in the room who don't understand. Our chief executive, he is the chair of that board, isn't he? So probably the best figure to have that day if the others couldn't make it. I think it's understanding, and just perhaps we should just have a thought or get somebody to have a look at how can we probably condense this down so it's more understandable for people to understand out there who can't get the grasp of it. As I said, probably out of 43 of us, there's probably a handful who actually understand this at the moment. Going forward, and it'll take a lot for others to understand it. They may not be even interested, who knows? And that's not to say that that's bad, it's just they just probably don't understand. It's like, how many people say, oh, I'm no good at maths? And actually they probably are, they just probably can't get the gist of it. Or I'm no good at science, and they say, well, I don't understand all that. And how many people do you ask in that room actually? Anybody actually needs to ask the question, do you understand this? Because it's being honest as well, isn't it? And are people being honest? Do they actually understand what we're trying to do here and what it's all about? And some people probably won't be honest. Some people won't even say. And I think what we need to do is perhaps have a little different thought of how we can put this over so it's a little bit more understandable.
Councillor Pratt.
I'm really encouraged and feel really happy to be part of this council because, I think I went to a workshop, I can't remember, it was, I think in the early autumn, where we had partners there and they had this great big tree and they identified all the different aspects of well-being, and it was absolutely brilliant. And I think the fact that we're the only council in Wales that has a portfolio holder for social justice. We are leading the way. And I think by taking these steps, I think it is going to address things like isolation in the community, rural deprivation. Where I live in Llanelli Hill, we've got really serious issues with things like transport, with things like people not being able to get to a job interview. We've only got one bus a day, and I think we have to start somewhere. So I'm really excited, and I think, it's brilliant that we're actually setting this agenda, and okay, we know that it's a massive task, but we have got to start somewhere. So, well done.
Okay, I think comments for officers to note there, but if we can move on then to the next agenda item, which has the wonderful title of Happy Communities.
Okay, thank you very much. So, this is a report that my colleague Sian Schofield has produced, and Sian is leading on this piece of work for us, but is locked away in the office, sort of beavering away on other things at the moment and deadlines. But just to give a bit of background and context to this one. Thinking about some of the earlier questions actually around measurement and how we understand progress against these things. This tool is an opportunity for us to do that. So this Happy Community started life as Happy City in Bristol. And it's a collaboration between a social enterprise in Bristol, Cambridge University, the New Economics Foundation, who are a very well-regarded think tank, to understand the determinants of well-being at a community level and to be able to track those over time. Now, a few of us saw Happy City in Bristol present this at an event in Wales. And we were really interested in it, liked what they were doing, but couldn't really justify spending the money to bring it into Monmouthshire. At the end of March, we had the opportunity of some Welsh Government funding, which had to be utilised fairly quickly to help us with well-being assessments and well-being planning. And it became available to us on a regional level, so we had to work on a broader footprint. So we took the decision, and through the Public Service Board, to invest that grant funding in developing this Happy Communities tool. And what it effectively does is two things. It's made up of two elements, which are in a sort of appendix 1 of this covering report, which is on page 29 of the bundle. There's the Happy Communities Index and the Happiness Pulse. So what the index does is effectively look at data and information that's out there, which accords with how people's sense of well-being. So things like income, employment, children's education, whether they've got qualifications. So it's those things that you say, if people do well on that, they tend to have a better sense of well-being of themselves. And those are things which are readily available from sort of national sources. And then the other one is that real sort of local determination, which the model gets. So actually going out and talking to people in communities and getting them to complete surveys. So by using this tool, and because it was done on a city level originally, it's been sort of rebranded as communities for within Gwent. And what I might do, see how we are for time. I did a sort of short video to show you, which can explain it far better than I can. But the essence of this is, they will be doing work, and we'll start to go out from January, February time in our communities to get people to complete these questionnaires and get a real sense of actually well-being on the ground in Monmouthshire. And then that's something that we can use in future to go back to determine, as we take this work forward and take forward the work of the Social Services and Wellbeing Act as well, whether actually people in Monmouthshire feel their well-being is improving. So we'll hopefully see shifts in some of the harder measures, but also some of the softer information as well. So Paul, are you able to flip the? Yeah, sorry.
Didn't take it out of this query.
So idea that when the sound doesn't work, we'll just put the microphone on it.
In our current economic and societal system, GDP growth is king. One of the many potential means to achieving human fulfillment, it has become the end in itself, the goal. When this is the driver, it skews the entire system. Does education produce productive workers? Is our health service returning people to work and consumption for the least capital outlay? Does business produce more and more products and more individual wealth to grow and grow consumption? When this driver seeps consciously or subconsciously through the whole system, it results in crisis at every level: personal, social, and planetary. A shift of emphasis at the heart of the system changes everything. Health services are focused on growing healthy, balanced lives, often preventing rather than merely dealing with illness. Education is about developing strong, resilient young people, ready to use their talents in the world. Business and the economy are still crucial, but focused on secure, meaningful employment and provision of life-sustaining goods, fundamental aspects of well-being. We have for too long confused a purely economic standard of living with quality of life. A bold experiment began in the UK city of Bristol in 2010. What would be different if we supported this sort of fundamental shift at a city scale? Happy City was founded to test a model of change for other cities to follow, adapt and grow. What can I do as an individual to better understand and improve my well-being? What can we do as a community to create the conditions for people to thrive? And what must policymakers prioritise to create cities focused on the well-being of every citizen? Happy City is creating a new model and measure of progress based on flourishing lives on a flourishing planet. A radically simple plan to grow happiness one city at a time.
So obviously appreciating that's the Bristol video. It was done on a city level. So what we have the opportunity to do is to use some of that thinking on a Gwent level. Again, it's zero cost to Monmouthshire County Council because we're using Welsh Government funding for this. What it would enable us to do, we believe, and they're having to change this slightly for a Welsh context. So they're redoing that model to fit South East Wales. We think that has got a really good fit with the work we're trying to do on the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, and to sort of build this future vision of sustainable and resilient communities. So it's a measurement tool. It'll enable us to track process, and we believe it fits pretty well with what we're trying to achieve, and we'll talk to some of those measurement aspects to enable us to track progress. We don't have anything yet we can show you on this in terms of the specific work that's been done for Monmouthshire, because it's currently in development with a view to a launch in January time. But on the basis of sort of what you've seen there and what's in the papers, has anyone got any sort of questions, or is it something you'd just like us to come back to you on in future?
Councillor Pratt?
When I was reading this, can you just put into context where we've got in the document pack, we've got equality, conditions, sustainability on the left, then we've got the 5 different areas, and then we've got score and rank. Can you just explain the context of those figures, please? Taking mental health, for example, we've got score 1, rank 7. Can you just expand on that a bit?
His microphone wasn't on. That's just an example, a bit of a screenshot to give you a flavour of how it looks. But if you think of the wealth of information we had in our well-being assessment, sometimes it's very difficult for those people who are not immersed in it day in, day out to get a sense of this. So what the well-being index does is sort of very, very simply, and I have to enlarge my screen to see the detail here. is to basically, similar to the way in which the Welsh Index of Multiple Deprivation does things, it sort of ranks and it says you're from most deprived to least deprived. It can sort of rank different criteria as to where they are compared to other areas. But also very simplistically, give things a score out of 10 and roll them up to one level. So you can see very at a glance how well a particular community or an area is doing on the different dimensions of the Wellbeing Index. So the example here that's on page 29 of the bundle, is that the one that's the one you're referring to? Yeah. So what you see here is a score, which is simply a score out of 10. So you can see actually in terms of the community we're looking at here, it's scoring highest in education and lowest in terms of community.
It's just a hypothetical example.
So this isn't Monmouthshire data. This is just an illustrative example of how that would look for our community. Apologies, we possibly should have been more explicit on that in the diagram. But it was one of the things that appealed to us greatly about this tool was its ability to present very complex data sets in a simple way that would enable us to present information to communities and have a conversation with them, and also to track well-being over time. So yeah, absolutely, and I'll just make that explicit for anyone listening into the stream at home. This is not Monmouthshire data, this is just an illustrative example.
How nice to hear members laughing during a report on happy communities. Have we got any other comments or questions on that? Well, thank you very much for that. And if you could pass on thanks to Sean Schofield for developing that report for us. Just in summary again then, the requirement that we now have to undertake a wellbeing assessment under the new legislation and the tool that's been developed with a grant from the Welsh Government that will give us a database to measure the happiness of our communities, that will then enable us as a scrutiny committee to come back with a firm evidence base by which we can try to make objective comment. So thank you very much for that. And if we could then move on to agenda item 9, which is a verbal agenda item. Again, it's been referred to by Mr. Gatehouse earlier this morning, and that's about developing the need for regional wellbeing priorities. So who's going to take us through that one? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It is just a very brief overview. There isn't a paper attached to this at this stage. But earlier this year, through the Gwent Wellbeing Strategic Assessment Group, or GSWAG, as it's been referred to previously, we commissioned some work through Public Health Wales, I believe it was, to look at how potentially we could come together and collaborate in terms of some of the Gwent priorities. So we felt that we needed to, whilst we've all done some analysis around our wellbeing assessments, we felt there was some relevance in terms of looking at the things that potentially could be solved or could be looked at in a more collaborative way at a Gwent level. So the problems and things that we have, or challenges that we have, that all PSBs are probably going to be struggling with. So was there some rationale in terms of floating these at a Gwent level to be able to look at how we could collaborate and work more effectively at that level to tackle some of these bigger challenges and the opportunities that would raise for us as a regional area. We commissioned some consultants that were led by Alan Netherwood, Dr. Alan Netherwood, and they carried out a piece of work meeting with all individual organisations under the GSWAG group. So they did an extensive piece of research. They looked at all of our wellbeing assessments. They had held interviews with us. We held then a number of workshops together where we looked at some of the data and some of the information and some of the evidence that was coming through at a Gwent level. And all of that led to probably 8 areas that we needed to focus on in terms of where we were all having similar challenges across Gwent. So they've rationalised those down now to a set of 4. So there's been some extensive work. Partners have come together. We've had discussions. We've looked at some of the information and looked at how potentially these 4 areas would probably be best served at a Gwent level if we could work collaboratively to tackle them, recognising that none of them will be solved by one county alone. So the 4 that they've now agreed to look at on a Gwent level is to make the best use of our natural resources to promote well-being, work towards climate resilience and reduce the region's carbon emissions. The other one then was to reduce inequalities with an initial focus on reducing the sort of cancer inequities that we have currently, and also the ACE agenda, so looking at a more informed approach to public service delivery and how we potentially need to be looking at the community safety element of that as well across Gwent. And then also another thing that they felt would be more impactful at a Gwent level would be to maximise the city deal benefits for Gwent with a particular focus on improving regional transport. So I think the areas that they felt strongly about with the city region was that at a Gwent level we are more likely to be able to be a stronger voice in that, and looking at how some of that could potentially help us in terms of our transport issues that we're all facing across the region. So some of that work, there is a paper that will be coming, isn't there, Matt? But it won't be until later in the year, I believe, from GSWAG. So we would like to bring that to scrutiny at a later stage, if that's okay. But that's kind of where we've got to in terms of the Gwent work, and they're the 4 objectives that we're looking at currently at a Gwent level. So it's not a legislative requirement to do that, but it is just a way of demonstrating how we can rationalise and see that it makes sense for us to try to work more collectively on these issues than try to tackle them in isolation alone in our own counties.
Okay, thank you for that verbal update on where we are with that. Is any comments on that? I mean, we've mentioned it earlier this morning, haven't we, that there will be pan-Gwent issues, and it's good to see that we've identified 4 priorities, and we look forward to a report from you in the future then. Okay, so back to the next agenda item. This is agenda item 10. It's on page 31 in the bundle, and it's just to consider, but where we're going on for the forward work programme. Where are we with this? Miss Eilert?
Well, as we've just mentioned, we've just sort of said what the next stages are. We don't believe in calling meetings where we don't need to discuss anything, but the future meetings of this select, we've sort of timed them accordingly with the meetings of the PSB. So the idea is that you meet as close to their meeting date as possible, and that we schedule the work accordingly. So if you're okay for us to meet when we bring what Sharon has just discussed with you, I think that's sufficient. I mean, we've got the ability to call specials if we need to, but I think at this stage that's not the case.
Are we happy with that? Councillor Howarth?
Can I just ask, on page 40 or 34 there, you've got Monmouthshire Scrutiny Forward Programme 217. You've got 8th of November date in there, 2 p.m.
I think it's that PSB dates on the left and scrutiny on the right.
Scrutiny on the right. So we're looking at January the 16th then for our next meeting, yeah?
But Chair, it might be an opportune moment to mention something on the 8th, which Hazel has the details on, if we could just come in at that point.
You'll recall that we were keen, you were keen as a scrutiny committee to meet with Sophie Howe to talk to her. Well, we've just had confirmation this morning. We thought it was not going to be till January, but we've had confirmation this morning that she's coming to that 8th of November PSB meeting, because she's been around the country and visited, I think, pretty much all the PSBs, but she hasn't been to Monmouthshire yet. So she's coming to the next PSB meeting on the 8th of November. So I don't know whether there's potential for the select committee to kind of come and shadow that PSB meeting, and perhaps we can see if she's available afterwards to have a kind of more informal discussion with following the meeting.
Yeah, my view would be, in terms of the agenda for the PSB on the 8th, whether that's an open agenda, because obviously if we were to observe, we'd need to bear in mind what's on the agenda for that meeting. But I think the select is quite keen to meet with Sophie, and we certainly should take this opportunity, because we've invited her to our select meetings, and it's not a case of her not wanting to attend. She's just incredibly busy, and I think this is possibly going to be our only chance to actually meet with her, but I would like you as select members to meet with her separately afterwards so that you can sort of get a steer of how she sees the future direction for scrutiny. But if we have a discussion as officers, see what the agenda is, and we'll put an invite out to you on the 8th anyway to have a meeting with her, perhaps after the PSB, and bearing in mind what's on the agenda that day, perhaps you can attend the full PSB and observe. But can we come back to you on that, if that's okay?
Are we happy with that, colleagues? Yeah. Okay, well, the final agenda item then is just to confirm our next meeting. And as Councillor Howard said, it's the 16th of January at 10 o'clock. Are we happy with that? Okay, well, there we are. Thank you all very much for your attendance, and thank you to the officers for their enlightening reports and willingness to answer our questions. So thank you, everybody.